Welcome to our Week 3 asynchronous session for English 12A. Our access code is one word this week, and the first two letters are CL. Welcome to our asynchronous session for today. Today we're going to be talking about bias in writing. We're going to talk about what it is and what we should do to avoid it. Oops, I forgot the word do in there. What should we do to avoid it? And we're going to talk about how it influences writing and why we need to stay away from it. So basically, let's start with talking about the definition of bias. You've probably heard people in the past say, oh, well, I'm biased. You shouldn't ask me, I'm biased. Basically, a bias is a prejudice or an inclination towards one thing. We all obviously have opinions, and we all feel strongly about our opinions. And we might be less open to certain opinions because of our own bias, because of our own experiences. We don't want to bring that bias into our writing. We should avoid bias in writing because it can alienate our readers. We need to write with objectivity. We want our readers to come to our side of the viewpoint, right? Or we want to show them the other options out there. So if we automatically jump in with our own bias at the beginning, our readers aren't going to trust us. We need to develop trust with our readers. So when we write objectively, we can generate that trust and establish that trust with our readers. If our readers don't trust us, they're not going to continue to read. They're going to be less willing to look at the information from our perspective. So we can identify a lot of different information that's important to our topic. But if we don't have the trust of our reader, the reader is not going to see the information objectively like we want them to. They're going to be looking at it from their own bias because we're going to put them basically on the defensive from the beginning. So we want to make sure that when we write objectively, we allow our reader to come and look at the information we present without threat. We learn to write objectively through experience and through maturity. Of course, there are lots of hot button topics that we immediately jump to our side of the fence and say, well, you're wrong because of this, and this, and you just don't get it. Well, automatically, the person on the other side of the fence is going to be like, well, you don't get it either. And that's where we get into an argument. So we want to learn to channel our passion. Of course, being passionate about our topic, not only does it make writing easier, but it also makes it more interesting. And so we can infuse our passion into our writing as long as we do it objectively. We don't want it to overtake our writing. So the big question then is, how do we avoid writing with bias? It's a good question, right? How can we learn to write objectively? Well, for one, like I mentioned, it's through experience and maturity, where we need to allow ourselves to see both sides of a viewpoint or both sides of the information that we're presenting. We need to avoid being general. We need to use evidence-based information. We need to be self-aware. So what does that look like exactly? So let's take a look at what that does look like. Hello, I just wanted to let you know our third letter in our access code this week is O. Okay, so let's take a look at what that looks like. So generalization. We don't want to assume all of one group are the same. Nobody likes to just be an all or a never, right? We don't want to use the word all people or we never see. We want to make sure that we identify the specific elements of a group. So for example, educators do not consider each child's particular learning style when developing lessons. Okay, well, as an educator, I'm going to say, well, that's not true. We need to identify which portion. Is it some educators? It's not all educators. So we can identify just the portion. We can modify that simple sentence to state, some educators do not consider each child's particular learning style when developing lessons. There's not a huge change between those two sentences, but it does identify that we're not saying all educators in that sentence. So avoid general statements that take one group of people and put them all in the same section. Next, evidence. Be specific with your evidence. If we don't include evidence in our claims, our audience is not going to trust the claim. So for example, third grade boys are chronically disruptive, while the girls are always eager to please. It's a very general statement, right? Because that's not true. I doubt all third grade boys are chronically disruptive. I have no doubt that my son, when he gets to third grade, might be one of those, but not all of them are, right? And as a boy, one might think, well, I was not disruptive in third grade. So we can include evidence here. The assertion is absurd if we don't have something to back it up. If we include evidence and showcase why that statement has been made, we can show our audience, look at this evidence. This evidence is overwhelming. So we could state, in Clooney's study of Kansas City third graders, 35% of the boys and 68% of the girls were able to complete instructions for a tedious assignment without showing signs of agitation. Okay, this is much clearer defined, and it allows your reader, it trusts your reader to come to their own conclusion. Oh wow, boys definitely did not stay on task as well as girls did. If you put the trust in your reader to come to that conclusion, you're going to be surprised, pleasantly surprised at the outcome. So by identifying the difference, 35% versus 68% is a good number, right? But it also avoids that general statement. Not all the boys had a difficult time staying on task. Only, a good portion of them did, but 35% of them were able to stay on task and complete the assignment. 68% of the girls were able to do that. So clearly there's a difference in the number, but it identifies that statistic. Okay, I'll give you that. Girls are typically, in this instance, 68% more likely to stay on task. Self-awareness. If we use personal experience or anecdotal evidence, that's great. I think that those things are important in the right context. So we need to make sure it's only when appropriate. And we want to use it supplementally. We don't want to jump right in and have all of our evidence be based on personal experience. Because again, your reader is not going to trust your objectivity in that sentence or in that essence if everything you write and all the evidence you use in your story or in your research or your argument is based on your experience. Because we are not objective when we think about just ourselves. So use self-awareness in your writing. For example, if I were to say, my daughter texts constantly, which shows that teenagers use cell phones more than they did in the past. As a teenager, you might say, well, that's not true. I never use my cell phone, or I don't even have a cell phone, or I'm not even allowed to text on my cell phone. Identifying the general statement and grouping all teenagers into one category, that they all text obsessively, that they're all obsessed with technology, isn't fair to all teenagers, right? So maybe my daughter, she's only 10, she doesn't even have a cell phone, but in this sentence, I might say, well, in my experience, my daughter texts all the time. Well, what's the data? This is where we take the general statement, we don't want to group all teenagers together, and we unpack it. We identify which group of teenagers is using the cell phone more than they did in the past. So look at this statement. This is where we be less general and we include evidence. Teenagers' use of cell phones, specifically for texting, has increased 33% in the last 2 years. This is from 2011. So, okay, that's fine. Okay, got it. Teenagers' increased use of cell phones for texting has gone up by a third. Excellent. That is showing me not all teenagers fall in that category, but some do. And it does show me some evidence-based information that teenagers' use of cell phones for texting has increased. So as the reader, I'm not on the defensive because you've shown me evidence and you've allowed for the groups to be unpacked. We've seen which elements of each group is utilizing technology in this way. All right, so there's some questions below the video. Go ahead and answer those questions for credit. Excellent. Now that we're all done with the video, go to our course and click on quizzes at the top to take the week 3 asynchronous quiz. The last 2 letters in your access code are UD. UD.